Welcome, friends. Very pleased to introduce my next guest, Ben Justman. Welcome to the White Bitcoin Show.
Thanks for having me, Dale. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it's been great just sort of getting to know you a little bit behind the scenes prior to clicking record. And I've been really excited about this discussion because it combines two of my favorite pastimes, of course, Bitcoin and wine. So, for those of you who are listening who are not potentially wine aficionados, I'm sorry, this is a wine focused episode. We're going to talk a lot about different vintages and all that. But no, there will be a lot of Bitcoin, of course, to talk about. Ben, could you just give us a little bit of background into kind of the story behind Peony Lane wine, your winemaking style, your approach, and just talk a little bit about that sort of journey, and we can just kind of paint the picture for the audience.
So I always kind of have to bring it all the way back to when I was a kid because the reason I'm doing what I'm doing today is because my dad's life dream was to retire to a farm. My great grandparents had a self-sustaining, like where they grew all their own food farm in Georgia, and he always wanted that. So in his 50s, he was into real estate. He sold everything and found the perfect farm out in Western Colorado, and it was a big apple and pear orchard. We produced two-thirds of the organic pears at the time. There wasn't that many organic pears back in 2003,
Yeah.
but two-thirds of the organic pears in Colorado. But anyways, that wasn't really what was going to work. Large-scale ag was kind of failing in the area, and so after a year or two of losing a bunch of money in that, he cut down a bunch of apple trees that weren't worth continuing, kind of varieties that didn't produce well, and was figuring out what to plant. And his buddy convinced him to plant a bunch of Pinot Noir grapes, saying, I'll buy them in a few years when they're ready. And a few years later, he gets a small crop the first year, and the guy says he doesn't want them the first year because he wants the vines to be a little bit older. But he teaches my dad how to make wine. And given that my dad wanted to make wine or wanted to grow all his own food, he's like, well, okay, I'll just make all of my own wine now. Like, this is 5% of the effort compared to take care of these grapes at that time. So he starts making his wine, does it for 10, 15 years. There's like 2 years in there that he starts selling wine, and dabbled in and out. There's some like serious wine people that see it, taste it, and are kind of like, what is this? This is really good. So that's always kind of in the back of my head, but I never thought I would move home. I never thought I would like take over what was my dad's hobby. But at 25, I was a geologist and was really hating my job with no like real career direction that I would be happy with, and was just on the phone with him one day, and he brought it up, and it kind of just was like, shoot, that makes sense. I have to go for it. And I've never made wine before, but I figured my dad could teach me. So then I move home, build a house, and start making wine. And about 2 weeks into the winemaking, the first year, I realized my dad had no idea what he was doing. He was literally just like going through the physical processes, like as bare bones winemaking as you could do. And I was, one, gonna have to teach myself, but two, I kind of had the confidence that like if he could make good wine doing it that way, if I can just educate myself a bit, I'll be able to do it, because a lot of the wine is in the grapes. And what he was doing is as low intervention winemaking as you possibly could do, which means what I need to learn to a degree maybe is a little bit lower than like trying to take bad grapes and manipulate them into really good wine. So my winemaking philosophy kind of stems from that, is like, what's the least I can do to these grapes to make good wine? And in a sense, that kind of means that I'm stepping out of the way and just letting the good grapes represent the terroir of where I'm at. So I grow Pinot Noir in the highest elevation wine region in North America. And it's a really delicate light, and it's got great like electric acidity because of these high elevation diurnal shifts that create hot temperatures during the day, cool temperatures at night, which slows the grape ripening. And it really just makes for a pretty awesome wine. But this area is up and coming, and Pinot Noir is kind of the thing that it's standing out for. And my dad just happened to like get told to plant it 25 years ago, and now I'm reaping the rewards.
Unreal, man. Of course, it goes without saying you've watched that movie Sideways,
Hmm.
and yeah, there is something about Pinot Noir. And like I didn't want to sort of interrupt, but yeah, Pinot Noir is probably one of my favorite varietals. Having come from South Africa in the Western Cape, massive wine culture. Moved to Australia, lived in South Australia, in the McLaren Vale region. Sort of you're about 20, 30 kilometers from the coast, so you do get that sort of ocean breeze. It does have that sort of ability to grow some exceptionally good Pinot Noir, and then the Adelaide Hills too. So totally familiar with what you're saying there. It's like kind of music to my ears. It's probably one of my favorites. And for those listening, kind of go, what the hell is Pinot Noir? It's a red grape, but it's day drinking red wine. Most people kind of have this association with red wine as it like a very heavy, you've got to have a steak or something, whereas it's kind of pretty light. And so you talk about this sort of non-interventionist style, but presumably there's things like pests and all those kind of things that can really hamper the process. And I mean, when this is what you do, it's your bread and butter. What are some of the things that you proactively do to minimize the risk of loss? Because farming is just one of those. I don't want to say thankless endeavors, but it's incredibly challenging to get it right. You're battling the elements, whether it's wind, rain, and and various other aspects, and then you've got pests. And if your ethos is not to sort of intervene with all sorts of pesticides, like how do you manage that sort of stuff?
So there's a bit of kind of just accepting that there is going to be some loss because I live on this land. I don't ever want to spray herbicides or pesticides on it because then it gets in me, which would get in my kids, and who knows what happens. Not to mention it gets in the wine, and that's not great. But the beauty of my climate is that it's so on the edge in the sense of it's so cold in the winter that a lot of different pests and fungicides don't really develop, or pests and fungal infections don't really develop. And um, it's dry enough that there's just a lot less to worry about in this dry, high desert environment where the cold and the dryness keep most of the things away. So we've had issues with in the past is grasshoppers. The last 2 years, those are kind of cyclical. It's been ridiculous. Like you take a step out there and 30 grasshoppers every single step just jump away. And those are vicious, but there's not a ton you can do without just spreading poison in your vineyard. And there's another vineyard nearby me and that did that. And, they said it worked, but do I want to just spread a bunch of poison pellets in my vineyard? Not really. We've also had bird issues, but that was kind of a one-time thing. There were a bunch of fires on the West Coast in California, and it pushed some birds off their migratory pattern. And by the time we kind of realized that they were starting to eat the grapes, we lost half our crop. So obviously major bummer there, but it's not a consistent issue because we are the last thing to ripen the Pinot Noir. We pick literally the day before it freezes most years. So where I live, there's peaches, cherries, nectarines, like all kinds of different fruit, all kinds of different veggies. It's an awesome spot to be growing food. But by the time the grapes are ripe and getting ready to be eaten, anything that was going to migrate is kind of on the edge or is really migrating. So outside of like sleeping out there with our dogs and raccoons and for raccoons and a shotgun, like we don't have to do a ton,
Yeah.
and that just kind of makes it a perfect spot for low intervention winemaking. And also on top of this, I've been kind of diving down a little bit into pesticides, just kind of on a residue perspective. Whether your neighbor sprays and it comes onto yours, but your land is certified organic. There's also the seepage in if you're way downstream getting water from a big river. Anyone who grows inorganically is going to have pesticide runoff into the river. That's your water. And we are also at the top of our watershed. So there's no one farming above us. So we have super pure water. And that really only comes in any neighbors that irrigate because that obviously goes to the ground, raises the groundwater. But we dry farm specifically. So we want those roots to go super far down, struggle, and always be in contact with new dirt so that our wine doesn't just become what we dump in fertilizer on top of it. Because if you're drip irrigating, the roots are just stuck near the top. and they
Mm.
become basically the fertilizer. That's what they're made up of. So if you're dry farming, the grapes struggle. They shoot down roots super deep and are always kind of getting new nutrients from all over, and thus a bit more connected to the land than you can get with a drip irrigation system.
Wow. So it's almost like proof of work winemaking. Do you know what I mean? It's like you want the vines to actually struggle. I mean, are these what you would call like bush vines? I think that's what we'd call it here. Where,
No, we do pretty typical pruning, nothing outlandish or anything. And we're like where we are is this kind of banana belt that's it's got the desert to the west, mountains on the three other sides, and it's really warm, but we have enough water with irrigation to farm. But yes, it does get cold in the winter, and every once in a while we do have like a negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit, no idea Celsius frost that will destroy everything down to the ground. So right before I was supposed to had made two vintages and was about to sell the first vintage I made after aging, we had a frost and it wiped out all the grapes in my state. So I had just started my business 2 years in, had never made a sale, and now my entire vineyard had been wiped out. So there's definitely like a ton of craziness in farming. There's a ton of risk, but wine being a product that increases in value with age, you can kind of smooth out bad years by having big years. It allows for a little bit of like ability to withstand that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. You sort of just hinted at it now, but perhaps we can just dive a little bit deeper on that sort of entrepreneurial journey because, you know, being a geologist by trade, and then sort of going into the winemaking space, you could say very risky endeavor. Entrepreneurialism is, fundamentally uncertain. Just wondering kind of what your experience has been thus far. You've described some of the perils and the challenges, but on a personal level, what have you sort of experienced, and are there any insights that perhaps you've can now draw upon some years later?
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot to say on that, but kind of in going into it, that any business venture is risky. And I knew that I needed to bet on myself at the time. So it wasn't just like, um, I didn't see it as risky because I saw it as like, yeah, I'm betting on myself. I'll risk some money, but ultimately, like the bigger risk is living a life unfulfilled. And I need to do something like this. So, um, everything was there for me to start. Like I said, my dad had made wine, so I had basic infrastructure and have had to scale up quite a bit. But it was kind of all there for me to do, and it made the leap both big but also small in the sense that I had a couple of years before I could even sell any wine that I made to figure out the business side of it. So I had a couple of years to kind of figure out the winemaking and then figure out the business side of it. And I mean, when I think back to the last job I had before moving home, I built my house for a year before I had wine ready. But the last office job I had, I was in horrible health. I was just unhappy. I was unmotivated. Um, it just my life is so much better now. Fixed my health, and I like just can't imagine having to go into work every day, even if I'd make a bunch more money, even if there was no risk. Like it's not. I don't know. Not having control of like what I do with my day is just it's a really foreign, scary. Not scary because I'll never go back to it at this point. It's just this
Mm.
is my life now. I'm super thankful for it. And honestly, and also I never could have seen what I'm doing today when I got started. There was no inclination that I would ever sell any wine online. It was always like, I'll eventually have a tasting room in my hometown. And now that I can't like even fathom doing that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's like one of the unfortunate things about so many people's lives is they live these sort of quiet lives of desperation where it's sort of like the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, weekends are there just to kind of get marginally wrecked, watch a few sports fixtures, and then do it all again. And it's just, I was just having a nice chat with my mum yesterday, and I just was like, I'm also looking now, having jumped ship from the Fiat life at the end of Feb. I'm also looking to associate more with people like yourself who have taken that leap because there's so much I can learn from people that have done that, and there's just something fundamentally different about engaging with people who are in charge of their own destiny than fiat slaves. And I've been one, and I'm not criticizing people that are. I've been for one for most of my life, but that there is something I thought that to myself, much like you've described, which is like, you know, um, yes, there's all sorts of other routes where I could make probably a ton more money, but I don't think you can put a price on kind of your well-being overall. And so, strangely enough, a couple of months in, yes, my cash flow is weak, but I feel so much more fulfilled, man. So that sounds really fascinating. Just from in terms of the actual business side of things, and this for the listeners who've continued it thus far, we will be diving into Bitcoin soon. But last question, just on the entrepreneurial side, you know, when I look at the wine business, I think to myself, and I'll just use Australia as an example. South Australia, I think, has got the best wine in at least in the country, and you could probably go and visit a different winery every single day of the year. And we actually thought maybe that's an idea. Maybe we can call that our alcoholic year. It's highly competitive, and then you've got to sort of balance things out with, do you want sort of tasting on site? Some people do restaurants, have a really quality chef. Some people probably like pre-sell a percentage to export. Some people like to sell at the cellar door. Just talk to us about kind of your strategy, and then perhaps that's how we can begin weaving in Bitcoin.
Yeah, my strategy has just been kind of shoot from the hip and see what's possible through all of it. The beginning, it was, I'd never run a business before. So it was just like, okay, I don't have the infrastructure money to build a tasting room. How can I get wine in people's hands where they taste it? I get instant feedback. Is this good? Can I keep going on this? Or should I just like be done? So I did farmers markets, and I live pretty close to a few different ski towns where there's a little bit more of a high end populace. So I was able to get it in front of a lot of people, get that instant feedback, and get cash flow early on. That was 4 months every year in the summer, and then for the first 2 years, I would just do. I would move to a ski town, work in a restaurant, and make good money that way because I wasn't selling much wine. I didn't have any online sales. It was just farmers markets were my business. And so kind of as I was doing that, it was still, okay, eventually I'll have a tasting room. And then Bitcoiners started asking to buy my wine on Twitter with Bitcoin. And I was kind of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I guess I was a year into that. Went to my first conference and just kind of kept saying yes to those things. And more people kept buying it. And it got to the point where every year I would drop one farmer's market, do one less. Because when I started, I was doing five, and that's 5 12-hour days, including driving every day all summer. So it got pretty brutal.
Yeah.
But I'll go backwards with the general wine business. But now I'm to the point where all I do is my only market is Bitcoiners buying my wine. And kind of what I saw in terms of like scaling up is what I scaled up in the sense of I don't know how much wine I'm going to need in 2 years. So I better just make more than I did last year because I think I'm going to grow. And if I ever want to scale back down, that's easy. But scaling up a winery is hard. It takes a lot of time because you're waiting on wine to age if you're making reds. And when you look at wineries, you typically see either big wineries or small wineries, and there's not much in between. And the reason there's not much in between is because the small wineries can't benefit from the economy of scale to compete price wise with the big ones, or have the personnel infrastructure to manage distribution, whether it's internationally or domestically. So you have a smaller distribution team and you hope to sell more direct to consumer, which is harder to do. So you're going to probably stay smaller. If you're big, you have the economies of scale. You can benefit from having a ton of people working distribution, but you do lose a little bit of that character. And so you're probably going to sell a little bit less or just not be focused on direct consumer because you're just not going to be able, that's not going to be a big part of your revenue. So there's kind of like, I could have some room to scale up to where before I would get to that middle ground. But ultimately, that just says either you're going to be big or you're going to be small, and dive into whatever you're doing. So in finding this niche of Bitcoiners being insanely passionate about Bitcoin businesses, about things going the right way, about low time preference, things they can buy and like think about. Um, I've just said screw it, and that's all I'm doing. And I don't really have any interest in selling to the general public anymore. I'm not going to turn down a sale, but like as far as like going out and seeking out new customers, there's none of that. It's all within the Bitcoin space these days.
That's amazing, eh? Because if you were still living in the fiat world, what somebody might say to you is like, look, okay, if you don't have the land to grow more grapes, then maybe what you can do is partner up with some of the surrounding wineries. Say, hey, can we buy some of your surplus? And then sort of cut corners, as it were, offer an inferior product to mass markets. Um, but it seems as if that would fundamentally compromise your core value proposition, which is kind of the low time preference, kind of organic, natural, minimal intervention for winemaking, as it were. And that's really fascinating. So literally, it's the case that today your entire market is Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. That's unbelievable. And okay, so when I think about Bitcoiners, I don't tend to think of them as wine drinkers. And I don't know what I tend to think of them. Maybe a cigar and a whiskey. But have you got some sort of profile as to the average Bitcoiner? I mean, I can kind of guess you're going to say it's people from all walks of life, but where are the majority of your customers, in the States? And yeah, I mean, you presumably haven't explored retail. You literally just shipping to people's doors.
Yeah. I mean, I explored retail as an option years ago, but it kind of came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to be worth my time. Um, Bitcoiners are, yeah, obviously all different walks of life, all different cultures, all different desires. Some people are into Bitcoin, some people aren't. But what I've found is the things I can stereotype a Bitcoiner are they're always kind of seeking truth. So they're always kind of looking. Once you learn Bitcoin, like I didn't know what thinking from first principles was, and then now I see that everywhere. And so Bitcoiners are always like, okay, I want to know the truth. What's in a bottle of wine? Why do I feel bad when I drink, and why do I not feel bad when I drink your wine? And they're also kind of Bitcoiners get the moniker of psychopath a lot of times. And it's not just about Bitcoin. I think it's Bitcoiners like, yes, are really, really passionate about Bitcoin. That's the one thing that we need, like, we believe drives the world forward to the change we want to see. And they're passionate about supporting the people who are doing that in different ways. And I think that being able to spend your Bitcoin on things in the real world, have real experiences with them, and make sure it's high quality goods is a really tangible, cool experience for people. I know, like, a couple of people specifically have been like, I thought I was going crazy with Bitcoin. And then I found out I could buy your wine. And it was like this really tangible. It's like, oh, this thing is real. Like, I just bought this wine from it. I just bought soap. I just bought tallow. Like, there's so many different things you can buy with Bitcoin now. And I think there's a righteous movement to, whether it's spend your Bitcoin, spend or replace, or just spend your dollars at Bitcoin oriented businesses, is a real way to push the world forward into what you want to see, because Bitcoin doesn't win as a store of value unless it also wins as a medium of exchange, unless it also wins as a medium of account. Like, Bitcoin needs to win on all three of these different monetary functions. And just being able to buy what you need in Bitcoin, and it's a high quality product that is from someone you like know or care about, is also like pushing the world forward, is kind of a big thing. So there's a lot of energy behind it. And I would say, like, in when I get asked by other entrepreneurs, like, yeah, you're only selling to Bitcoiners, like, what are these people like? It's really like, this is your best customer. Describe your best customer to me. That's exactly what a Bitcoiner is. It's people that want quality, they love your product, and they're shilling it like crazy people to everyone. Because when you buy my wine with Bitcoin and you bring it out with your friends or your family that isn't that into Bitcoin, they say, "Oh, wow, this wine's good. Where you get it?" I got it with Bitcoin. This is my entrance to talking about Bitcoin with all these people that like have been like shitting on me with it for years. But now, oh yeah, you like this wine? I bought it with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different angles, but ultimately, like it's it kind of wine is a pretty perfect thing because it enhances conversations, it enhances meals and special moments with family members, and if you do it, in my opinion, the right way, you don't feel bad after drinking it. And there's a lot of Bitcoiners that are pretty focused on health.
That's a great point, and we'll touch on that later. What is exactly the reason people feel terrible if they don't normally drink, particularly red wine, but they find if they've had half a bottle or something like that, they wake up feeling absolutely hellish? What's the key driver behind those sort of hangovers?
Totally. There's no cut and dry answer that I can say because it's different for everyone. But in general, my opinion is that it's just whatever's added to the wine. So my wine, extremely minimal. It's basically just grapes, and like I've had a few times where like I end up at a party or something drinking a ton of wine, and I don't even ever like have the thought of, oh, I'm going to be hungover tomorrow. I just wake up, stayed up late. Alcohol is not exactly great for you, but you don't have that headache. You don't feel horrible. And a lot of people get red wine headaches, and they blame it on sulfites. They blame it on tannins. They blame it on anything that they know, because wine is just this kind of mystery black box. And
Mm.
it's unapproachable because someone who knows wine is kind of a pompous asshole a lot of times. And so you
Yeah.
can't feel like you can ask questions. And so what I've distilled it down to is there's 73 different additives you can put in wine in the United States without having it on the ingredients label on the bottle.
Mm.
And any one of those could be giving you problems. The majority of people blame it on extreme amounts of sulfites. And in my research, I haven't found that like sulfites specifically give you headaches. Some people probably are having adverse reactions, but not everybody. And so the thing is, if you're using a ton of sulfites, you're probably using a lot of other stuff, and you could be having a reaction to any of these things. But if you drink wine that is boiled down to what it is, grapes and thyme, you don't feel bad. So it's something in between those things, and it's kind of unbelievable until you experience it, um, because you just associate alcohol and feeling bad the next day. And it's unbelievable when someone says, no, it doesn't have to be like that. But if you drink low intervention wine, it just is.
Totally. All right. Apologies. You probably can hear some sort of works in the background. We are constructing a little dwelling in the back, so apologies if it sounds awful. Chainsaws and God knows what else these folks are doing. But actually, as you're speaking, I'm thinking to myself, like, traditional wine is in some ways very fiat because it's got so many additives that just really kind of detract from that core relationship between literally it's just a grape. I mean, at the end of the day. Um, in South Africa, and you might have heard of these sorts of things, but we've got a varietal called Pinotage, pretty unique to the region, a red wine, and probably a little bit heavier than Pinot Noir. And there was sort of a groundbreaking, I guess, release that came out some years back, which they called it chocolate Pinotage, and it was strange, but it had an almost chocolatey taste. A whole bunch of copycats came along, and they started creating their equivalent for half the price, but doing all sorts of things that I thought I had no idea what these people are actually adding to the wine to give it that taste. And much like there's sort of tricks that people play within the wine game where they can create the impression of the oak, where they sort of just get bits of oak and drip it in and let it soak in the wine as opposed to sitting in a casket and things like that. I think there are all these shortcuts and they're very fiat. And something perhaps that Bitcoiners are looking at when they look at your wine is that there is that sort of core element of just the bare necessity of what it is. Like it's just real. It's like people don't want to eat like hyper processed industrialized food. similarly on the wine front, which makes sense. And to kind of go back to the point you were making earlier about Bitcoiners being truth seekers and things like that, it's something that I've often asked in podcasts. I say to people like, "What do you think it is that binds us as Bitcoiners?" And there is that quest for truth, absolutely, and thinking from first principles, absolutely. Like you really just want to understand things. Like have a baby, and suddenly it's like, "Oh, well, here's a bunch of vaccinations you need." Okay, talk to me about these vaccinations. Let me understand what are the different vaccinations. What kind of tests have been done? Like these should be reasonable questions, but the average person doesn't tend to sort of engage in that sort of thinking. It's kind of most people tend to be low resolution thinkers, unfortunately, which can drive us Bitcoiners mad. But it seems as if you found your niche there, and I mean, how exciting in the sense that you effectively get to do something where that you love, but at the same time you get to sell it to people that you kind of identify with on many levels, who are going to be evangelists, because there is something about Bitcoiners. They are evangelists. They are the proverbial Jehovah Witnesses knocking on doors, sometimes with an unwelcomed response. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll just sort of shut up, is I've thought about this a lot here in Australia, is that we've got like some construction happening right now. Okay, they happen to be really good dudes, and I'm really happy with them. But if there was a forum where I know that there's a bunch of businesses, construction companies that are run by Bitcoiners, there is something about it that there's this layer of integrity. If some guy was like, "Yeah, I accept XRP," I'm like, in fact, that would put me off. That would mean that you have no credibility. That would mean that I don't think you've got integrity, and you're probably going to cut corners at every single opportunity. Whereas there's something about Bitcoin is they're going to make you a statue or a home, or they're going to do your plumbing or whatever the case may be. There's something about it that says these people appreciate quality, and I think that's being, reflected in your wine. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome in that sense, man. And so when you think about, I mean, I've touched on a couple of these things, but there's certainly parallels between the way that you make wine, and then wine itself, I guess, and Bitcoin. I'd love to hear if you've got any other sort of insights in that regard. Maybe we've touched on a few.
I think your assessment that a lot of wine is made with a fiat mindset, a lot of construction is done with a fiat mindset, is totally apt. There's so many things today that are low time preference things are meant to be that lose that. So you build a house in a few weeks just because it's the same house over and over and over, and people need housing because they need to escape the dollar and they need to put their money somewhere that's not totally deflating, because they don't understand the system. And with wine, this is like where I'm so thankful I didn't go to college for wine and learn all these tactics, because then it would be subtracting from what I know and a fear of, okay, I'm in control and I'm losing control, where my baseline is, to a degree, this is being a bit esoteric, but nature knows best. And when I get approached by, hey, you should add this or do this to your wine, it's always, for me, a bit skeptical, because it has to cross a high bar for me to want to do an additional thing that could risk this natural process in the wine. And wine is meant to be this long thing. You're supposed to age wet reds for a long time, but there's ways to cut corners. I mean, man is powerful in inventing new things. So there's ways to cut corners. Wine is hidden behind this facade. It's a black box of class that you can't get into. It takes, like I said, if you wine, you kind of come off like an asshole. And so I feel like a lot of my role is kind of just making wine more approachable. Like, the fundamental thing with wine is not whether it's good or not, it's whether you like it or not. And then additionally, the next thing would be, how did you feel after you drank it? And anything other than that is someone else telling you how to think, which is a fiat mindset. I think Bitcoiners are appreciative of being able to think for themselves, because for most of us, at least, the way the world works is like, we had to totally unlearn that to be able to understand Bitcoin and flip our minds on its head. And we see so many people that haven't done that, and it's a bit humbling. And you kind of learn that, like, okay, I need to approach everything like this, and once you learn how to think about understanding Bitcoin, you kind of approach it from everywhere. And then the last thing I'll say is when it comes to like your preference of I would rather work with a Bitcoiner because you quote unquote know you're getting quality. I totally agree with that in the way I interact and in what I've seen with my business. And I think just the unspoken agreement that I have with my customers is if I'm spending Bitcoin on your product, it better be damn good. And if I'm going to do it again, I better be damn good. And so if you're seeing other people spend Bitcoin on something, you have a great sense, a great tell, because you have so many other things. You're trying to figure out the best person to do whatever. If there's people spending Bitcoin on it, it's a mark of quality.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as say every Bitcoin I've ever met is just this incredibly high integrity person who I trust with my life. But you still need to exercise a little bit of judgment as we do in our everyday life. But by and large, I tend to find they are far more like high signal, high integrity people. And at least here in Australia, where I've described a vast majority of the population, and I say this with the greatest respect because I really love living here, as being kind of asleep at the wheel. They're not awake. They're not critical thinkers. They love propaganda and they love government overreach. Bitcoiners are my people by and large, and so it's been kind of my saving grace as a migrant in a country where, yeah, it does feel as if you come from Africa, which is a wild man's world, to what is the complete opposite. And so, Bitcoiners, I think, represent somewhat of a happy medium. And just to touch on your point, nature knows best. I mean, you know, I always like to have conversations with people around that sort of concept. Yes, it is the case that, of course, there are amazing breakthroughs with modern medicine, science, all these types of things. It's phenomenal what we've been able to do. Our ingenuity never seems to end, and it never ceases to amaze me. But we sometimes get so caught up in the weeds of that stuff that we forget some of the basics and the fundamentals. And like I often like to just talk about the Ozempic craze that's happening all around the world. I'm like, yes, there might be some guys that are like 400 or 500 pounds. Like, yeah, maybe that's the good risk benefit analysis. I'll take that stuff. But for the average person, it's just like you got to just figure out how to manage your emotional eating and just exercise, man. And I say that as someone who overeats, by the way, so I get it. But so I think that's kind of the idea. Yeah, like, there are no real shortcuts, and that sort of low time preference, particularly also when it comes to your health and whatnot. Now, this is something that one of the trade-offs of being a public Bitcoiner is that you do lose that sort of anonymity, and of course, it's something that a lot of Bitcoiners cherish. They really kind of value their privacy. There's literally people in Australia that I've got a pretty good relationship with. I couldn't even tell you their first name. They literally, I just know them as their online persona, which is fine. I totally respect that. But of course, you've kind of stepped out of that world and you're fully public. Plus, people know where you are. It's like, and it's not like you're open to the public per se, but how do you think about that now, just from like the $5 wrench attack perspective, and then maybe you just want to sort of weave in to the extent that you guys have a treasury and are kind of just keeping a little bit of a something called storage. Like, how do you mitigate those risks? Because it's something obviously me as a public Bitcoiner, albeit a small one, thinks about from time to time.
Yeah, I don't think I would be able to really do any other way. I kind of enjoy putting myself out there in front of people. So um, it just wouldn't be me to be the anonymous person. Um, and that kind of goes with like if you're the I'm the I am Peony Lane. Like I have people that work in my vineyard every once in a while, and I hire labor help every once in a while. But ultimately, I don't have any employees, and therefore, when you are the product, I'm the product to a degree. I am Peony Lane, and if I was I think there's a level of trust you can get when you know the person and when they're out there that you wouldn't be able to get, especially in this like the black box market of wine, that you just wouldn't really be able to get that connection without being public. Um, for privacy or for security stuff, there's definitely some trade offs I make. I mean, It just requires more security for the Bitcoin. But also it helps that I'm not like in a city. I'm pretty far away from everything, and take a decent amount of effort to come out here. And there's a lot of guns in my community and around me, so there's that aspect of it as well. But I mean, ultimately, from the beginning of getting into Bitcoin, it was always like, I'm loud. I'm going through my phase of being the evangelist. I think we all hit that. But it's all from like, I was helping my friends with their personal finance before I found Bitcoin, just getting them into like the right 2% return credit card, like don't have any debt on that, and get a good bank account, and then automate your savings, get this automated investor. Like you need to figure this out. And so I kind of knew where everyone that I was around was financially because I was helping them with it. And I knew that people didn't know anything. And so I really found Bitcoin from this perspective of like, I've always approached it from an educational perspective of wanting to help people. And I mean, that's why we're in it, is Bitcoin makes the world better and it makes people's lives better with that, whether they, without them really even knowing they use it in the ideal sense down the road. So I don't know. I definitely believe in like I said, all the stuff about like, you know, more security, guns, everything, but ultimately like, and this is not a foolproof thing, but ultimately I think the energy you put out into the world is what you get. And if you're out there calling out people and being an asshole, you're probably going to expect some asshole things to you. And I mean, get those random assholes, but ultimately like nothing but love comes back for the most part if you put it out there. So that's the esoteric answer. The real answer is better security and guns.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, I like that combination. Love on the front end, and then, if necessary, guns on the back end. And it is one of the things I greatly admire about the US is that you still have that ability to be able to just protect yourself. It's something that us in other parts of, the West, Australia in particular, like we are absolutely like our ability to take care of ourselves and our family has been completely neutered. And and I say this as not somebody who's ever owned a gun, even in South Africa. Um, which actually, now that the more I think about it, particularly being a Bitcoiner, for sure, I would definitely be a guy with a gun in South Africa because it's like super necessary. But the idea here in Australia was that we turfed our guns in, we gave them back to the government. There was an amnesty period. I don't know, maybe in the 90s or something, there was a school attack, and suddenly now the citizenry is completely disarmed, and the government's got the ultimate monopoly on violence, and I do now get increasingly concerned because even in the short 7 years that I've lived in Australia, it has become noticeably less safe, for a whole variety of reasons. But um, there's a non-zero chance that somebody could land up in my property, in my home. And I don't like that scenario. And I want to be able to take care of things. I mean, literally not far from where I live, like 150 meters, two guys, broke into a house, took the car keys and sold cars. Like, okay, great. They didn't, there wasn't any sort of confrontation and, exchange of fire or anything. But like, my God, man, somebody steps into my property. I'm like, in my world, that's like all bets are off. Like, I don't know, what the hell are you doing there? So, yeah, what a crazy situation. But I think, yeah, I really love what you say. I mean, fundamentally, like, I think there's people out there that sort of seem to attract a lot of drama, and like, quite frankly, a lot of the violent crime, and a lot of the crime in general in Australia is happens to people who are in those circles, mucking around with, the drug world and all sorts of stuff. Like, it's typically not your sort of average law-abiding person. Um, I think the last thing I thought that we could just sort of touch on, and this is something maybe I'm sure you've given tons of thought to, is there's a sort of maximalist perspective of like, vegetables are garbage, and now it's like lifting and creatine, which is great because I happen to be doing it anyway. But there's certain things that I'm not like fully on board with when it comes to a lot of these. kind of Bitcoin maxims, if you like. And one of them is like alcohol's a shitcoin. And it's something that's very interesting because I think that I suppose for habitual drinkers, and by that I mean kind of daily drinkers, maybe you're not like a full-blown alcoholic that wakes up at 7 in the morning, but you have a couple beers, maybe three, four, every day, and you function, you're a functioning alcoholic. Maybe I can see the issue there, but yeah, I've just it's something that I'm seeing like a movement of sobriety, particularly amongst this latest generation. They prefer to pop things like MDMA than something that's like as boring as a Gen X or Boomer as alcohol. So yeah, just talk to us a little bit about that relationship between alcohol and health and sort of how you navigate that like intellectually as well.
Yeah, I think just being a winemaker, a lot of people think I drink a lot, but I drink like maybe once or twice a week, a little bit of my wine or some tequila on a special occasion. But um, always been a lightweight, so never went too hard on it. Obviously, drank a lot more in college, but um, I think that there's some fundamental things, as we can say, is alcohol as a chemical. Ethanol is not good for you. Um, and drinking culture is bad. Um, there's a lot of people that drink to escape their lives. They kind of drown it out. Alcohol is a depressant, and that's obviously bad. And then you also factor in the fact that like everyone assumes if you drink alcohol, you're going to feel horrible the next day. And so I kind of look at it from the perspective of drinking a lot's bad, and the less you do it is probably every time you do it is going to leave more room for enjoyment. And I mean, I obviously make wine so I want people to drink, but it's ultimately I'm pushing the philosophy of drinking to enhance, not to escape. And I think there's something special about opening a bottle of wine with friends, family on a beautiful night alongside a beautiful meal, whether it's that or just having a great conversation with a friend. And alcohol kind of changes the way you think and interact, and maybe it lowers inhibitions, maybe it just loosens you up and settles you in, maybe you just like the taste, but there's something spiritual towards it. And there's no like there of all alcohols, and doing the research, wine is the only one that has stuff that does things for you for realistically. Like there's antioxidants that are good for you, and then there's another chemical, I forget the name, that decreases your liver's ability to filter out testosterone from your blood. So it doesn't increase your testosterone, but it keeps that from lowering while you're drinking. Um, but other than that, like there's not tons of health benefits from alcohol outside of these maybe spiritual benefits that if you use it in moderation, if you drink high quality wine, if you put it in high quality circumstances, it can really elevate those experiences into memorable ones, whether it's making the food better or the conversation better. Or just breaking out like the gesture of breaking out this bottle that you've been saving for years to share with someone. I think those are super healthy, where alcohol itself is never going to be healthy. And so if you can't really look at the nuance there, you're always going to say alcohol is unhealthy, you should stop drinking. But I think there's a lot of room for nuance in drinking a bit. And especially if you're really worried about that, you should be drinking low intervention red wine. Um, like whiskey's cool, you age it, it's like got that cool low time preference aspect to it, but it's basically just alcohol. And then if there's flavorings, there's a lot of potential for manipulation in that as well. So drink in moderation and drink to enhance, not to escape. And I think you can have a really healthy experience with it. But yeah, the general culture is super unhealthy drinking, associating drinking with bad health habits, and ultimately like a serious negative thought to it, because a lot of alcohol is horrible and alcohol is addictive. So it takes a lot of personal responsibility to, I think, move alcohol to a positive place in your life, but it can be done.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, when they look at those parts of the world where there's folks who have lived, beyond 100 and whatnot, there's a couple different things that they will say, but I mean, relationships is really important. Often they drink, often they smoke. I mean, it's weird. but there's in and of itself, it's clearly not the best thing for you, but there certainly is room for it. And as you're describing that sort of experience of opening up a really nice bottle and sharing it with friends, that's exactly kind of the culture that I've been sort of brought up with. Of course, when it's the third, fourth, fifth bottle, then it's no longer that spiritual experience. Then it's like, yes, we definitely will be feeling this the next day. And so it really is just a question of the frequency and the volume. But there is something really epic about it. And yeah, my friends in South Australia, whenever we visit, they will bring out something from the top drawer, and whatever it might be. And like they've been saving that particular bottle. And sharing it with people who actually appreciate wine because there's nothing worse than opening up a quality bottle and then having a guy just go, that's not for me. This is garbage. And maybe just drink the sort of volume commercial stuff. But it is ultimately like it is also very subjective. Much like whiskey, some people love that sort of peaty whiskey. I personally just can't deal. I like something a bit smoother, but. I think everything you say there makes sense, man. I can certainly see a role for it when it comes to just having conversations. I'm not saying I want to be kind of lick it up every time I have a meaningful conversation, um, but particularly when I think back to kind of my younger days, sure, there were so many phenomenal conversations that I've had that kind of just was sparked. And like, I'm not much of a white wine drinker at the anymore, but we used to love Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay, and we just have these sort of long lunches and just have these incredible conversations and leave the day kind of feeling like really full with love and joy and whatnot. I know, and it sounds bizarre because someone listening will be like, why don't you just do that with like water, man? Sparkling water, water or something like that. But I don't know. For me, there is still something there, and especially if you've grown up in that environment, um, like the Western Cape in South Africa or Adelaide, it's difficult to describe that relationship to wine without actually
Yeah.
having it there. Yeah, for a guy who
I
lives in New
mean,
York, like I mean, like he's not going to feel the same way.
any mind altering substance is going to change the way you think. And I think at times it's important to change the way you're thinking in order to like get yourself around a problem, think of things in new ways. In moderation. I mean, I think it's super valuable at times and obviously can be overdone. And it's not just alcohol that can provide that. So um, everyone kind of has their different path. And I mean, good wine, I think, is a great reason to spend time with friends.
Personal responsibility too, man. Yeah, 100%. Uh, Now let's imagine, and like, sorry, I mispronounced the name of your winery earlier. So Peony Lane wines. So let's imagine we're here in Australia. You're not sort of in the export business. I'm assuming. What are some of the tips that you could give people, kind of in closing today, of like they can't get wine like yours? What are some of the things that they should look out for if they're just heading to a normal retail store? They're not big drinkers, but they kind of just want to get a little flavor for what you've described, that sort of low intervention wine. What are some of the markers and things that we should be looking for?
Totally. So there's no exact one size fits all. And generally, I would say um, try to meet your local winemaker whenever possible. I mean, you go to a tasting room, there's the tasting room, basically bartender there. You can only ask so many questions, but you can kind of ask like manipulation. I usually ask, like, what's your philosophy on sulfites? And you could say that from like I hear that sulfites give you headaches. Um, and that's something they've heard a million times. And maybe with one more follow up question, you can kind of get the idea of whether they're like, no, that's bullshit. We just like whatever, it makes better wine. It's not the sulfites giving you headaches. Then you probably know they're probably using a lot of it and maybe some other stuff too, likely some other stuff. And then if there's anything with the farming aspect, you can kind of search for the dynamic of, are they trying to domineer or are they trying to like almost, I don't know the right term in this moment, but like it's not live with, it's kind of like let the grapes do their thing to a degree.
Is it
There's kind of an
biodynamic,
art.
Ben?
So biodynamic in the United States is kind of, I looked into it because outside of burying a goat horn filled with crystals in the northeast corner of my property on a full moon, which is a literal part of it, I would qualify for biodynamism. And I decided not to do that because it's basically, it just felt like a scam paying $3,000 a year to this company, not the government. Weirdly, I would rather pay the government than a company for this, to put a biodynamic label on my wine. And I think, yeah, that's maybe important if you're looking for large scale. And if you're just like poking in the dark in a liquor store, that's valuable. But I know my customers and they are in contact with me to describe that. But I think if you're like, ask the winemaker if possible. Those are a couple questions. If you're in a liquor store, wine store, just say I'm looking for low intervention wine. I get headaches is another thing you can say. And then if there's no help or anything, I just default to French or Italian. And there's probably other countries that you could do. But what I find is French or Italian wines, even if they're exported, do have a higher propensity to be less manipulated. They just have a different culture with winemaking. And in a lot of places, glyphosate is banned. So you're going to be a lot safer with those countries' wines, even though that's an extreme generality.
Yes, of course. No, absolutely. I mean, like if you got a $5 Italian wine, look, they to reach that price point, chances are they've probably had to cut a few corners, but anything that's half decent for sure. This has been awesome, man. Really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on. Did you want to give the audience a sort of handoff where they can find you? I know certainly those in the States would love to learn more. And maybe one day you'll expand your operations into Australia.
The beautiful thing about Bitcoin is I don't have to expand ever. I can just kind of keep
Yes.
doing what I'm doing, earn good
Yes.
money, and that's a good living. Um, I am primarily on Twitter and Noster, at Ben Justman on Twitter, and then Ben Justman at primal.net on Noster. And you can follow me there. Got a wine club going out very soon, so you probably missed that. But the next one's in August if you're in the United States, or you can just order wine, 6 bottles ship free all over the U.S. at peonylanewine.com, PEONY. Unfortunately, I don't ship outside of the United States, and that probably won't change anytime soon, at least in the current paradigm of the world. But maybe Bitcoin can change that.
Awesome, man. All right. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate your time, man. And yeah, take care.
Cheers.
Cheers, man.